Boasting about 12-hour days isn't a sign of productivity, it's a sign of poor boundaries.
That's one of my favorites, and I get a lot of engagement from that.
Today, we're diving into how to become a millionaire through your 9 to 5 job. This will be a bit of a different podcast as we usually discuss startups, how to know when to leave your 9 to 5 to make that leap of faith. But at the end of the day, we are here to show you different ways that people have achieved financial freedom. Our guest today became a millionaire after working nothing but 9 to 5 jobs, though now he does run his own business revolving around personal finance and his path to a million. At the age of 35, Steve Adcock was able to quit his full-time job in information technology and retire with his wife, who is also in her 30s. Using strategic investments and powerful side hustles, Steve and Courtney are now financially independent. Steve is an online entrepreneur and writes about personal finance and early retirement. And with that, let's dive into the conversation. I'm your host, Matthew.
And I'm your co-host, Nick. Welcome back to Founder Framework. We break down the success of distinguished entrepreneurs to uncover how you can replicate their success.
Here, you'll receive actionable insights that will guide you to your dream business, project, and lifestyle. Now, let's get into the podcast. So, welcome, Steve. We're now recording. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Thanks very much for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Of course. So, we're diving straight into it, like right away, with a bit of a heavier question. What are your feelings on corporate America?
Well, from the minute I set foot in the office for the very first time, so I graduated from college. I was young. I was ready to make some money and be a quote unquote professional, right? So, I mean, the day I set foot in the office for the very first time, I kind of asked myself a question. It's like, this is it. This is what it means to be a professional. This is what it means to go through a 9 to 5 and make money and all that. This probably isn't going to work for me long term. I mean, at that time, I didn't have any clue about financial independence or especially early retirement. No idea whatsoever. But I knew from that point on that corporate America was not going to work for me, and I had to get out of this as fast as possible. So I set my mind to making as much money as I possibly could and getting out as fast as I could so I could actually enjoy my life until, typical retirement age, rather than working until 60, 65, maybe 70 and hoping that I have like maybe 5 or 10 or 15 years of quality life left.
Yeah, that's I guess I could kind of see that happening, right? It's maybe a bit underwhelming when you first walk in and through those doors. So how did you start formulating that plan to retire early? I think a lot of people are curious to hear that. I know you have a roadmap in particular. But yeah, what was your next step after walking through those doors, realizing you didn't want to be here for too long?
Well, at first, I really didn't know what the solution was. I didn't know what I was going to do to put all these pieces into place to actually achieve financial independence and retire early. In fact, I just kind of assumed that, well, I'm probably going to go through this for 20, 30, 40 years and, just do the best I can. But I found somebody that I connected with. And for me, it was a guy named Mr. Money Mustache. If you're in the early retirement or financial independence community, you probably have heard of this guy, Mr. Money Mustache. He has a very, very big popular blog. And he was a software developer just like I was. And his story matched up right along with mine. It was very close, a lot of similarities. And understanding his story and understanding where he was coming from and how he was putting the pieces into place for his life made it so much easier for me to do that with mine. So I was really trying to connect the dots a little bit. And this was, several years after starting. I didn't just, I described the story of when I set foot in the office for the very first time. That next week I didn't start doing this. It was probably 5 years down the road before I actually got my butt in gear and started to do this for real. But once I found that person, that positive influence to kind of show me the way, then I started to make some incremental changes and things added up from there. So it has a lot to do with controlling your expenses and increasing your income. So your income are your assets. Your income plus investments, the things that you own, those are assets. Those are things that provide that increase your net worth effectively. And then your liabilities, your costs, your monthly costs, like your rent, your car payment, your mortgage, whatever, everything you pay for, those liabilities, including your debts, subtract from your net worth. So an easy way to think of this as it is your net worth is all of your assets minus all of your liabilities. So if you can kind of do both of them at the same time, increase your assets while reducing your liabilities, you're going to build wealth quickly.
Nice. I think I've read you write about this before, but you've referred to this, I think, specifically as wealth equaling income plus investments minus lifestyle. Is that correct?
That's right. Wealth equals investments minus lifestyle. And for me, lifestyle was your expenses and your debts, basically your liabilities. But lifestyle seems to be an easier word that people can kind of wrap their brains around rather than liabilities, which sounds really, really negative. Mm-hmm. And on paper, let's face it, it kind of is. But I think using terms that people can connect with, I think makes it a little bit easier to wrap, people's minds around how this actually happens.
Cool. So would you have any advice on those if you're willing to share on advice on lifestyle management and basically controlling those liabilities or expenses for those? Because I think you would be in the camp that agrees that being able to manage your lifestyle really helps you compound that wealth to basically provide a foundation for your investments to grow. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, the less money you spend, the more you're going to be able to invest. Mm-hmm. So if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably into entrepreneurship and starting your own business and doing things yourself and making a lot of money on that route rather than just going through a 9-to-5 job. And that's great. I love that. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a wonderful way to make money. But what I hope that you take from this podcast is with the money coming in, regardless of how you earn it, whether it's a business or a 9-to-5 job, regardless, it doesn't matter. The source of the money doesn't matter. What you do with it after it hits your checking account and your savings account, that is what truly matters. That is what's going to get you rich. That is what's going to make you wealthy, not simply your income. So once that money hits your paycheck, what do you do with it? Well, you can save it, build up a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. So if you lose your job or you get in a car accident, your roof springs a leak, you don't have to go into debt in order to pay for those things. So your emergency fund, in my opinion, is your number one thing to do with money. And that is before investments. I love investments, but if you don't have an emergency fund, you are going into debt when something happens. So save up at least 3 months. If you can save 6, that's even better. Separate that money into a savings account so it's separate from your checking account. You're not tempted to spend it, but yet it's still easily available for when you need it. So set that money aside, have a nice little cushion, a buffer for when you need it. Then look at investments. Look at investing in companies or in index funds, which I really love. I'm not smart enough to pick and choose stocks. I'm just not. And quite frankly, I find that to be a little bit high stress. Anyway, so I'm a index fund investor through and through from the very beginning. I set it, I forget it, I watch it grow. I spend 5 minutes a month looking at my investments. Max. That really is it. So a lot of people seem to overcomplicate investing, but index funds are the easy button to investing. Yes, you can actively managed fund. There's no doubt about that. But you have to like doing that, and you have to have the mentality to be okay with that level of risk. Mm-hmm. I don't have either of those things. So for me, the index funds worked beautifully.
Thank you for that.
So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Mr. Money Mustache and finding that person as almost like a virtual asynchronous mentor and learning how to become financially free as fast as possible. To give the audience a realistic timeline, how many years, if you remember, did it take you to go from discovering that path to actually reaching the end of that path, which would be, I guess, financial independence?
So it was about, I would say, 2011, 2012 when I first discovered Mr. Money Mustache's blog. In 2013, I met my soon-to-be wife, and that gave us another pot of money because she worked a full-time job as well. I worked a full-time job. So combining those salaries together, we were probably making over 200 grand. And this was in 2013. So back then, to use the word back then because it makes me feel old, but 10 years ago, a salary of over 200 grand, I mean, that's pretty damn good, right? I mean, it still is today, but especially back then. Mm-hmm. So if I did not have that extra source of income, I wouldn't have been able to do it quite by 35. By 40, yeah, probably maybe 42 or something max. But that extra salary, I mean, of course, that helped a lot. And for a while, we were saving 70%, that's 70% of both of our combined incomes. We were investing my wife's entire income, 100% of it, straight into a brokerage account. And we were living on about half of my salary, which was about 100 grand. So half of that was around 50 or so. And we tried to spend no more than about 30, 35, maybe $40,000 a year, leading into financial independence and early retirement. So you know what? I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. There's a lot of sacrifices that we had to make in order to reach financial independence at that age. You certainly do not have to do that. I do not recommend this at 35. In fact, it's probably not going to be possible for a lot of people. But what I would say is achieving financial independence and maybe retiring early if that's your goal, that's going to be possible for a lot more people than you might realize, as long as you start putting the pieces into place now. It could be 40, could be 45, could be 50, doesn't matter. All of that is quote unquote early retirement. And with smart money strategies, you could start doing exactly what you want to be doing without having to worry about money ever again.
Nice. So just to recap for the audience, that those pieces that you talk about and to implement is basically having your safety cushion of about 3 to 6 months, getting that in place, and then if you're not interested in the markets, just shoving everything into an ETF so that it can compound over time, right? And then essentially that would be as quote unquote simple as that sounds, not as simple as to execute. Do you have any like mentality tips or mindset tips on how to actually stick to this path, right? As you said, it's very aggressive to save 70% of your income, obviously given the luxury and the ability to save that much, as some people might not have. But if we were to apply this on a smaller scale, do you have any advices in terms of like habits or tips or like tips and tricks in that sense?
I have one major habit that works for literally 100% of everybody who's tried it, and that is automation. Okay. Make things automatic. If you work a full-time job, your 401k, your Roth IRA, your HSA, if you have one available, a 457 if you work for the government, these automatic payroll deductions funnel money into your long-term investment accounts automatically. You set it up once and you never have to think about it again. That's the beauty of automation. You're not relying on yourself and your own discipline and remembering to fund these investment accounts. They just happen. And this is also possible for, in brokerage accounts that are outside of like your company benefits. For instance, if you open up a Vanguard brokerage account, which we did years and years ago and we love it, automatic bank transfers. Just log into your bank, go into your automatic transfer section. Most banks have that, and just set up a transfer, $1,000 a month, $500 a month, whatever you can manage realistically. Just keep funneling money over time using the power of automation. And this goes hand in hand with something called DCA, dollar cost averaging,
yes.
Which means you're not trying to Yeah, you're not trying to time the market or investing everything you have when the market's down. You might be able to get lucky once or twice, but guess what? You're not going to be lucky consistently over the long term. So in my case, again, I took the easy route here. I used automation. I used dollar cost averaging, which means I am investing a certain amount of money every single month, regardless of what the market's doing. I don't care if the market's up. I don't care if the market's down. I'm investing the same amount every single time. That makes it easy. That makes it stress-free. And over the long term, you are almost guaranteed. And you can look at the numbers over the S&P's performance and the Dow and the NASDAQ over the last 60, 80 years. You are almost guaranteed to make so much money if you do it consistently and you're not overly emotional with your investments.
Nice. Yeah,
So, go ahead, Nick.
yeah, no, I think that's super powerful stuff to automate your habits. I think that would be that is something that a lot, like, I don't implement this and I feel like I should, to automate those investments away to your Roth IRA and away to your 401k, and for my Canadian listeners, into your TFSAs and your RSPs. I think getting rid of the self-discipline and making it a part of your income by paying yourself first is super important. So thank you for sharing that.
So I had a quick question. I was wondering if fortunately you were able to work in tech, and it sounds like you're both able to do very well for yourselves in terms of annual salary. If you were to do this all over again, perhaps starting at a lower salary, do you think you would have done anything differently, perhaps more aggressively, or just would have been more patient and taken more time?
I probably wouldn't have been more aggressive, because at that point, if I'm making substantially less, then I'm living on almost nothing then if I was even more aggressive. I can't live on like 10 or 15 grand a year. Not many people can. So it would have taken me a lot longer to reach financial independence than it did with 2 IT salaries. My wife is a rocket scientist, an actual rocket scientist. So that salary combined with my IT salary, it's good. There's no question about it. But if we made half that, if maybe my wife and I combined for 100,000, we probably wouldn't have retired. In fact, I know we wouldn't have retired by 35. So what I like to do is, with everybody hearing my story, I don't want you to focus on the retiring by 35. Retiring by 30, because that's just not going to be possible for a lot of people, almost regardless of what your income is, because your situation is going to be very different. So don't focus on the 35 part. Focus on the achieving financial independence as soon as you can. Whether that happens to be 35 or 45 or 55, there's nothing wrong with any of those numbers. So to answer your question more directly, I probably wouldn't have done anything different. We may not have saved like 70% of a lower salary, because then it may not have funded our lifestyle in a way that made us feel happy and fulfilled. We may have only saved 50%, or maybe even less than that, maybe 40%. So it would have taken us longer, but quite frankly, the same strategies, regardless of what you make, almost regardless of what you make, the same strategies are going to be in place. Take advantage of your long-term investment accounts, whether it's 401k or Roth IRA or HSA. Make it automatic. Control your expenses. That's going to work over time for the vast majority of people. It may not be 35, it may not be 45, but it's going to work.
Got it. So you had mentioned a couple blogs that were influential in your journey, and I'd seen that you'd started Think Save Retire in 2014, your own blog, and sold it in August of 2019 when it had over 100,000 monthly page views, brought in about $1,200 to $1,600 a month. So how did you grow it to that point, and how did you make that decision to sell it?
Yeah, I started the blog really early in my journey to financial independence, and at the time I really didn't have any interest in making money from it. I didn't care. I was just writing about my story, just doing my thing. adding whatever I could to the financial independence, retire early community. Just whatever I can do. But it slowly started to gain a little bit of steam. And I think it was because people really relate to stories, personal struggles and conflicts and successes and things like that. And that's really what I would write about on Think Save Retire, especially early on. And people were starting to connect with my story. I got more readers, I got more comments, and I would always respond to those comments early on to keep the activity going. And, over time, there's only so much you can write about. There's only so much you can say about financial independence, especially when I actually achieved FI. When I achieved financial independence, it's like, well, I have a blog about what I was doing to achieve financial independence. What am I going to write? I'm there. I've reached the finish line. So what am I going to do with this thing? And so for a while, I just continued writing about, just financial independence in general. I got more general with my story, and I got a little bit more readership. But I think it was 2018. I came to a fork in the road. It's like I have no passion for this anymore. I'm going to continue writing it because I work so hard on this thing to build it up. I can't just let it go. I can't just let it die. But fortunately, an investment firm reached out to me in 2019 and was interested in buying it. So at that point, it's like, okay, this is probably the right time to sell this thing and move forward. And that took a lot of introspection. I mean, entrepreneurs a lot of times build something up, sell it, move on. Build something up, sell it, move on. And I'd never really considered myself an entrepreneur before that point. But I really started to figure out, well, I kind of am. I built this blog. I did the best I could. I made some money from it. Now I'm going to make even more and move on to the next best thing. And that really gave me a lot of confidence to finally let go of something that I spent years and years and years to build up.
That's a really cool story. Did you do anything special, or or were you just posting for yourself, as you mentioned? Did that growth just happen organically, or were you, it doesn't sound like you're trying specifically hard to grow it. You're just documenting your story and sharing it with people. Is there anything that you want to talk about in regards to the growth?
Especially early on, I really wasn't doing anything special. I wasn't writing SEO heavy articles. I was by the end, because it was less of a passion and more of let's just continue building this thing, building. And so the SEO became more of a component of the blog, search engine optimization. But early on, I just kind of wrote what was in the heart, and people connected with it and started reading, and I just kept doing that as much as I could. But yeah, it was nothing special. I think I had a writing style that a lot of people connected with. Mm-hmm. I'm not an Associated Press writer or Reuters writer following the standards, using particular language and words. I mean, I cussed in my blog. I didn't care. And that was one of the things that attracted me to Mr. Money Mustache. He did the same thing. And I really connected with that. It was like a very conversational, like I was talking to the guy face to face. And that is really what I wanted from my blog as well, like talking to my reader face to face. And I think that was a big part of why my blog got as popular as it was, because it wasn't these official, heavily edited, perfect articles like you might see on CNN. It was just, spur of the moment, straight out of the heart kind of stuff, where we might have a conversation over a beer or something. It read in a very similar fashion, and that really, really helped, I think.
So with all that experience now, you're still running an online business today, from what I understand. So what encompasses your online business right now?
Yes, it is a business, but it's not necessarily a traditional business where my goal is to make money. Mm-hmm. We've already made our money. I mean, we're not filthy rich, but we're rich enough. I have an ebook. It's called Big Money. But other than that, quite frankly, I don't really do a lot to make money. Maybe some consulting on the side in information technology just to keep my skin in the game, because that's what I did for a career. And I don't just want to completely waste everything I did. I want to keep up to some degree. So I do a little consulting work here, consulting work there. But I mean, I'm bringing in maybe 25, 30 grand a year at this point. So it's really not much because I don't need much. We live very small out here in this off-grid house in the desert. So it's, yes, it is a business, but it's not a money-making business because I'm over that point. I've already done that. I love finding ways to make money, even if it's a little money, doing something that I really, really enjoy. And writing the ebook, connecting with people on Twitter, writing the blog. I'm now investigating Medium, and maybe I could become one of the top writers on Medium. Those kinds of things that are just very creative and very entertaining for me. That's really what encompasses my business at this point.
So you mentioned information technology consulting as well. Are there any projects you're currently working on or anything that's of interest to you, and why does it interest you, if so?
I like to work with people who I have a pre-existing relationship with. So
Okay.
if you know of the blog esimoney.com, he has a forum called Millionaire Money Mentors. I am the tech resource behind that. I also work with Jay Money from Budgets Are Sexy on a project that's actually owned by the Motley Fool. It's called All Star Money. It's a big curation site where we curate the best articles in personal finance. So those kinds of small projects. I don't get involved in 9-to-5s. I have zero interest in becoming a W-2 employee anymore. This is purely 1099 contract work. And that's really how I work best. I can control my time. I work when I want to work. I do little things here and there. But I want nothing that's going to control my time anymore because I spent so many years trying to get out of that by achieving FI.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So going back to Twitter, we saw a few tweets that we want to ask you about in person because they definitely caught our eye. So we have a few tweets that we're going to read off. Everyone should definitely also follow Steve on Twitter if you haven't already. And so the first one is, those who think they need $10 million to be happy never will be happy ever. What does that mean?
It means your expectations are very, very lofty. And on its face, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's great to aim high. It's great to have those big goals, right? There's nothing wrong with that part. But quite frankly, the vast majority of us don't need $10 million to be happy. You might think you do. So what I'm saying in that tweet is, for the people who think that they need $10 million to be happy, what's going to happen is they're probably not going to reach it. But even if they do get to $10 million, do you think they're going to say, all right, I got my 10 mil, I'm happy? No, of course not. They're going to say, well, that was fun, but I think I could get to 50. I think I could get to 100. Whatever. They're going to keep upping the ante. And if you don't keep yourself in check there, and you don't appreciate the things that you have on the way to some of those bigger goals, and that's a problem that a lot of us struggle with, me included, to some degree at times, then you're never going to be happy because you always want that next thing, that next big thing. And $10 million is just a number I came up with. But yeah, the majority of people who think they need that to be happy, they're just going to keep increasing it at each step, at each rung, and they're probably not going to be happy ever.
Yeah. I think. By the way, on Think Save or Retire, I think there was an article recently about how money is like salt. It doesn't add flavor to a meal, but it enhances what you already have. So if you yourself aren't happy, money can't make you happy. You have to basically ground yourself and be okay with your life first, right? And money doesn't change anything. It just amplifies your successes, but also amplifies your problems if you have problems. That said, so I think you're spot on about That 10 million mark is just a value. It's an arbitrary value that everybody sets off, like you said. and realistically, you got to make sure that you're okay first, right? So I really like that.
So the next one is boasting about 12-hour days isn't a sign of productivity. It's a sign of poor boundaries.
That's one of my favorites, and I get a lot of engagement from that. Frankly, mostly positive, which kind of surprised me. I kind of figured I would get a lot of hate from that one, but I didn't really get as much hate as I thought. And what I meant by that is, I mean, there are going to be times where you're going to work long days, 10, 12, 14-hour days, especially as you're building a business. I've done that too, quite frankly. I built a failed business about 10 years ago. I learned a lot from that experience, by the way. But I did the same thing. So you're not a bad person if you work that much. But what I was getting at from that tweet is if you're like bragging about the fact that you work 12-hour days, frankly, you don't have your priorities straight. And if you keep doing that, you're going to burn yourself out. It happens to everybody. It happened to me. It probably happens to a lot of people who are listening to this podcast right now. You work too much, too often, you're going to burn yourself out. Your work is going to suffer. You're going to become less efficient, and things are just going to spiral downhill. So I would encourage you not to boast about the number of hours you work, but maybe boast about the things that you've done, the accomplishments, how efficient you are. You grew your business from X amount of money to X amount of money, or from X number of customers to X number of customers. Those are great things to talk about. But just talking about how many hours in a day you work, that's not very healthy.
For sure. You mentioned something that piqued my interest a little bit there. You mentioned a failed business, and I just want to poke around just to see what that was like, and your experience with that. So if you don't mind sharing just a little bit of a background there.
Sure. Yeah. This was probably 10 years ago, and it was a software product. It was a scheduling app for doctors in hospitals. All hospitals use a scheduling app to schedule when doctors are going to work, and it takes under consideration circadian rhythm. So, for example, you can't work 2 nights in a row, and you can't work more than 3 nights in a month, or something. I don't remember all the rules, but it was an app that you just click a button, and the software just schedules everybody according to your preferences, and time off requests and all that. A lot of hospitals already have that in place, but we were designing something better. In fact, we even got to the stage where we were demoing this product in front of hospital administrators. So we were that far along in this process. Mm-hmm. It was 3 people, me and 2 other guys, and we were all working 9 to 5 jobs at the time. So we were literally staying up to like 12, 1, 2 a.m. on work nights to get this thing out the door, to build it up. Ultimately, life got in the way. It never worked out. I'm not exactly sure what happened. Maybe we just lost interest or something. Maybe we burned out, quite frankly, and I didn't even realize what was happening. But we were close. There was a lot more work to do, but man, we were close to getting our foot in the door. And if we just kept pushing for another maybe month or 2, we probably would have had our first customer. Mm-hmm. But even though it failed, even though we didn't move forward with it and go forward, it was a huge learning experience, because I really learned exactly what I am capable of doing when it comes to that. And those were the days where I was working 10, 11, 12, 14 hours a day to get this product out the door. And like I said, it didn't end up working, but I learned a lot from that experience, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, like setting your boundaries, for example. Thank you for that.
So was that during the time that you were trying to build towards that focus of financial dependence, or was it during those like first 5 years of working your 9 to 5?
Yeah, it was before. My main goal with that business wasn't to get financially independent or to retire early. I wanted a 7 Series Beamer. I just wanted to spend the money. I wanted to make money, and I wanted to spend the money. I wanted a BMW 750. That was like my lofty goal once this thing got off the ground and we started pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So yeah, that was way before this whole FI thing came into my mind.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. The reason I asked is because I was wondering how that would play with trying to be financially free while also spending time on a startup that might perhaps be losing money in the beginning. But to go back to the original tweet that we talked about with 12-hour days, one that builds off of that is the 40-hour work week could be easily replaced with 10 to 20 hours of focused work. And this is something that I also have actually experimented with, where for 2 months, I tracked every single hour of my life. Obviously not to the finest detail, but pretty close. And I could see how much of my time was focused and on task and how much of it was actually not. Because I think we can spend these 8-hour days and feel like we just had a full day of work, but only had a few hours actually on task. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, similar to the, I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, you're going to fill the space you have in your house. If you have a 5,000 square foot house, you're going to end up filling it with stuff. And the same concept is in play with work. The time it takes to accomplish your tasks is going to fill up the time allotted for you to finish those tasks. So if you have an 8-hour day, guess what? You're going to take 8 hours to finish those tasks, but you're not necessarily going to be like focused deeply on your work because, quite frankly, you don't have to be focused on your work because you have so much time to complete it for most of us. But I did a very similar experiment that you did, Matthew, where you track your time and you really figure out exactly how long it takes you realistically to complete the tasks in front of you. And if we had a system, and this wouldn't work perfectly, I'm not suggesting we go to this kind of philosophy overnight or something. It would never work that quickly. But if we had a system where you work as long as you have to work to get your job done in the right way, I'd say 80% of us, 90% of us would probably work about 20 hours a week, maybe 15 hours a week to actually get our work done. And we'd have way more time to spend time with our families or to do our own thing, like side hustles or side businesses. We'd have way more time for all that. We wouldn't necessarily need to spend 8 hours in the office just because that was the expectation, because we're paid for 40 hours a week. I think that's a completely archaic way of designing a corporate America structure where we all work and make money. There's a lot involved in that, but I really don't like it, and I don't think a lot of people like it either.
Yeah, that actually leads directly into the next one we wanted to talk about. But actually, before we jump into that, I think there are some countries that implemented 4-day work weeks, and it boosted productivity by a lot. Like France? Okay, yeah. And it actually worked quite well. But you mentioned, as an adult, it's your responsibility to unlearn the things taught to you by a society that doesn't have your best interests at heart. So this was one that we thought was could be very deep, and we're wondering what your thought was behind this.
Yeah, the work week was part of that, but really I started that tweet in my mind from school age. I was taught that reading was boring. I was taught that reading was a chore or an assignment because we read books that, quite frankly, I didn't care about, like Shakespeare's Othello. I don't care. This is not something that I give two wits about. If you, and then you're obviously quizzed on it, you're tested on it. If you get something wrong, then you're going to get a bad grade, and it was from the very beginning of my life that I can remember. In school, you were taught to, the teacher was always right. You were taught to obey. You were taught to follow directions. And those things that's not what gets you ahead in life whatsoever. Now, I'm not talking about like a criminal activity or breaking the law. That's not at all what I'm talking about. But stretching the boundaries of what society thinks that you should operate in, I think that's a very, very, very healthy way to not only live a healthy life, but to make way more money than you ever thought imaginable. Watching the news, that's something everybody does. But quite frankly, the news has never improved anybody's life, maybe except if you're a politician. But it never makes you happier. It's designed around negativity because that's what brings in eyeballs and that's what gets sponsors and commercials on, because more people are watching to see what we should be afraid of today. And that's another rule or an expectation of society that you really need to think about. Like, is that actively improving your life? Is following directions actively improving your life? Is working your 9 to 5 job because you think that that's what you're supposed to be doing actively improving your life? If you keep asking yourselves those questions, I think you're going to start questioning what you do more and more. And this is a process that I went through early in life too. And quite frankly, I'm still going through that process. I'm always questioning to this day what I'm doing every day and if I can make things better. And I'm not just going to go through life because that's what society, or that's how society expects me to go through life. I'm going to design something that works best for me and my family because that is the priority. Making society happy is not my priority. Making my family happy and successful and me happy and successful, that is the only thing that I care about.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of it has to do with living for yourself, right? Not really fitting into the cookie cutter mold that society expects you to be, but rather finding out what you want to do and pursuing that passion and just living your own life. And I think that's not even just like a financial independence thing or a retirement thing. I think that's a pretty good mantra that all of us can live by, right? It doesn't apply to any one sector or basically a 9 to 5 or a startup person or a founder. I think we all have something to learn from that wisdom of yours that on that tweet. And we were so impacted by things to unlearn. Oh my gosh, it sounds exciting and also terrifying at the same time, because I share the same experience as you, right? In school, reading was a chore. You know, you read books that you couldn't really care for, and then you'd come out and basically have to write an essay on them or do an assignment, and then you were negatively reinforced by all the things you got wrong, and then suddenly you have to fit into this mold, and this like mental conditioning of fit into the mold is something that you should try to break. So I love that, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you got it. If you think about the richest people in society, in the world, very few of them follow the rules. I mean, Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, Bill Gates. You think they went through life the way society expected them to go through life? Hell no. They did something way different. And look at them. Yes, if you break the rules, you're not necessarily going to be a billionaire. That's obviously not what I'm saying. But if you take a look at the examples of people who made it, whether they're millionaires or billionaires, very, very few of them follow society's expectations.
And I think another thing is another good mantra. So one is, how is this affecting my happiness, like you had said, but also what is does this service or does this product have an agenda? So you brought up the news, and like for me, I also don't really, watch the news every night. My family does, but I usually ask like, hey, can we watch something else? I try and stay up to date with current events, but like every night it just makes me kind of sad. And then it's like, or even financial media, right? With stocks, it's like they talk about how the Dow is down 700 points instead of like, maybe like 0.4%, because it sounds way scarier when you say 700 points. And so always ask like, do they have an agenda? What are they trying to make me feel? And is that in my best interest, just like you said? So one more thing, this one I actually would love to hear you decipher, is the goal is to be so productive that you don't have time to be offended. What does that mean?
That means if you're busy, if you're productive, if you feel good about what you're doing, you're uber efficient, you're just knocking things out, you're getting things done, then you don't have time to listen to other people's BS. And whether that's, watching the news or being on social media and reading just relentless negativity. I mean, those are things that we tend to do when we're not, actively engaged with something better, not actively engaged with things that are improving our life. When we have extra time on our hands, that's when we start to go on social media and look at whatever's happening in politics today, or listening to people who are going to hate us for any reason. Haters going to hate. That's always going to happen. We're never going to be able to escape that. But I found that, and I've lived both sides of this, where I had lots of time to debate politics and to really argue about things that were completely outside of my control. It obviously did not improve my life, and quite frankly, I don't think it improves many people's lives. And if you're busy every day, whether that's your 9 to 5 job or your business that you're starting or a side hustle or anything like yard work, whatever, if you're busy doing things that make you feel productive and like you have purpose in life, you're just not going to have time for all that stuff. You're not going to have time to listen to it, and you're definitely not going to have time to feel offended because of somebody else's opinion out there that might be different than yours. So keep yourself busy, keep yourself productive, keep yourself efficient, and this takes time to figure out how to put those pieces into place, of course. But if you can do that, you're going to have less time to care about other people's opinions, and you're going to have way more time to focus on you, focus on your family, and building yourself up the best way that you possibly can.
So I personally, I do kind of agree with that, but to play devil's advocate, if we were to take the two extremes, right? Say you optimize to just be efficient and not concern yourself with others' opinions or what's going on with the news. And then on the other end, that's like all you do. You're always on social media, engaging with society, watching the news, watching every current event unfold. On one hand, maybe it is just a lot of things out of your control that aren't really worth spending your time on. On the other hand, do you think there's a danger of being too disconnected from society or from others and maybe forming your own echo chamber, even if it's just yourself that you're talking to?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I get that a lot. Whenever I post about not watching the news, one of the common questions I get was, "Well, then how do you know what's going on? You don't want to be an idiot about everything around you." And quite frankly, I found that the news that's important enough for you to know, for you to recognize and take under consideration, you're gonna find that out. That's just almost by osmosis. You are gonna hear about it. Like, I don't watch the news, but I knew about the Ukraine-Russia scandal the hour it happened. But I didn't watch the news. These things just get to you, whether it's social media or talking to your friends or talking to your family. If you work in an office, people are going to be talking about it. So I think for most of us, unless you literally live like out in the middle of nowhere, disconnected, you don't see anybody for months, no internet, no phone, you are really like on Mars, right? Then yeah, I think there is a risk of just living in your own little echo chamber, not really figuring out what's going on or realizing what's happening in the world. And yeah, that can have a negative effect on you. But I think the news is the absolute worst way to expose yourself to what's going on because it is so negative. You're only getting that one side. And as you go through life as a normal person, right, talking to people, having friends, engaging in social things, you're just naturally going to hear about the things that are going to be important enough for you to hear about. And throughout my life, that's always been the case. I haven't watched the news. I haven't watched an hour of news in probably 10 years. But quite frankly, I've never really been surprised about something happening. Maybe something small that is inconsequential to me. But if it's important enough, I'm definitely going to hear about it. And I think that's going to be the case for a lot of people.
Got it. And so the last tweet we have pulled from your Twitter is, all that junk in your closet and garage used to be cash. So this led me to think, how do you see the world? And when I say that, when I look at food, I kind of just see the carbs, the protein, the fiber. I see food as like what they're made up of. And that tweet kind of makes it sound like when you look around, maybe you see their utility, maybe you see their value. So is there a way that you view the world? Is there a certain lens that you use that you think might be unique to you or more unique to someone pursuing personal finance?
I think for a lot of people, if you take a look at the things in your closet or your garage, you'll start to pick out those things that you bought a month ago, a year ago, maybe a couple years ago that you've never really used. And I mean, those things used to be, you bought them with money. Those things used to be cash, but now they're sitting in your closet collecting dust. And this happens to me too. It still happens to this day, even though I've achieved FI, I have a pretty good understanding of money. This still happens to be. It happens to everybody. So I'm not pointing the finger. I'm not placing blame. But this is a really interesting way to take a look at the things you have and understand what's truly meaningful to you. So I would really encourage everybody listening to this podcast to take a look at some of these things. Open your closet or your junk room or whatever, and understand the things you bought, and then understand the fact that, well, I'm not using these things, so maybe I don't buy something similar in the future, or maybe I sell this and get something better. Whatever the answer is to you, I can't tell you what that answer is. But I think having the understanding that a lot of what you buy you end up not using, that is going to slowly seep into your subconscious. So the next time you do think about making a purchase, it'll ring in your head like, well, I bought this last year, I never really used it. Am I really going to use this? I'm probably not. I might, but I probably not. So you might delay that purchase for a month and realize you just don't need it. So obviously I'm not talking about the things that actually have value and you are using that are in your closet. Those are great purchases. But I think a lot of the time we're going to find things that just weren't. And the more we understand how that happens and when we bought these things and the fact that it does happen to all of us, I think it's going to be easier to not buy those impulse purchases maybe when we're at the grocery store, or not log on to Amazon because we're bored and add a bunch of things to our cart, because we've done that before and those things are in the closet and they're not being used.
Yeah, you have me looking around my room right now and in the space just like analyzing, how much did I pay for that? And that's a really good mindset switch, right? Because I've never really thought about things that are lying around my household as just cash, right? And that's true because at one point in time, you had to have the cash to purchase this, right? So having that mindset switch, because this is the first time I've ever heard about it too. And I really think that would be something I'm going to be actively thinking about going forward. So yeah, great piece of advice, to be honest.
Yeah, and two questions that my dad actually boils it down to that ring in my ear every single time I'm like about to make a purchase. Every time, I kid you not. Like his voice just comes down from above into my head. And he asks, do you love it? And will you take care of it? And I think those two questions are a really good filter, because if you love it, you have to be honest. Like, do I actually love this, right? Because it's almost, you're saying like something you might think of is, I'd rather buy this and spend this money and give it to someone else than invest it for myself. That's one way you might be able to look at it. And then will I take care of it kind of forces yourself to think about, well, will I take care of it, several months from now? Will I take care of it a year from now? And if the answer is yes to both of those, chances are you're making a pretty solid purchase. But it also filters out a lot of those impulse purchases or those things you're kind of on the fence on. So that's, awesome. So I guess we would like to learn more about what you've got going on in the future. Now that you're financially independent, you're financially free, and you seem to be doing everything you want to do on your own terms, what do you see yourself, or what do you see your life looking like in the next 5-10 years? Do you have any goals now that you have achieved FI, or are you just kind of taking things as they come?
More or less, we're taking things as they come, and that's kind of the beauty of this lifestyle. We've already achieved that major goal, and yeah, I mean, it is healthy to still have goals in the future, and we have little ones and things like that, but nothing like a major, like we want to move and live in certain country or something. We don't really have those goals yet. We're just incrementally improving the property that we have here. We live out in the middle of the Arizona desert in an off-grid property with solar panels. So I'm building a separate gym off-site, well, on the property, but outside of the house, filling it with gym equipment. And we installed a well last year. So those kinds of small incremental property improvements, those seem to be the things that we think about the most and encompass the majority of our goals. And those, of course, are short-term. Where we see ourselves in 5 years, Quite frankly, I don't know. As long as we're happy, as long as we go through every day of our life feeling like, yes, this is what we should be doing, this is where we should be living, and I am content with everything that I'm doing, quite frankly, I cannot ask for much more than that.
Do you see yourselves developing your current property into like almost like a compound with more and more structures, or is the gym more of just like a one-time project?
Well, yes and no. We started with just like an 800 square foot house. 800 square foot, that's pretty small, right? I mean, we only have two people, but that's all we need. But we also closed in the garage. So now we're close to 1,000 square feet. We put a storage shed behind the house just for a bunch of junk, right? Like the garage, for example. And then the gym. We have plans for maybe a bar or smoking lounge or something, maybe. So yeah, there is a little bit, right? Yeah, I know exactly. I'm really looking forward to that. But that's really as the money comes, because it's completely discretionary. We don't need that. But I mean, if we're doing well and it makes sense financially, maybe we'll do it. But other than those things, we don't really have any plans to expand on this property. However, I do really want to get involved with real estate, whether it's real estate investing or whatever that looks like. That's not something I know a lot about yet. But I've convinced my wife to get a real estate license because she is detail oriented, and I think she would be a perfect real estate agent. So we're going to investigate that and just see what happens with that. And like I said before, that's kind of the beauty of this lifestyle. We can try things, and if they work, great. That's wonderful. But if they don't, who cares? We'll just move on to something else. So real estate, I think, is our next like money making educational kind of endeavor that we're going to investigate and just to see where it goes.
I love it. Well, it sounds like you guys are really living by design and doing whatever interests you at the moment, which is all you can really ask for. And it's also interesting. I figured real estate was probably one of the methods you had used to reach financial independence, but it just goes to show you don't have to go through real estate to reach independence, right? You can simply go through index funds and investments, maybe in the stock market, and just managing your money correctly with the right accounts. So yeah, best of luck with that. Now we do have 5 or 6 questions that we ask every guest that comes onto the podcast. And every time we just ask you to do 1 to 3 word answers if you can. So it's kind of like a lightning round, meant to be fun, kind of casual. But before we jump into that, where can the audience find you?
I'm online at steveadcock.us. That's my main blog, and I spend a heck of a lot of time, probably too much time to be honest with you, on Twitter. My handle is Steve on Speed. On Speed part came from when I drove a Corvette back in the past. It has nothing to do with drugs. It was just the fact that I love to drive fast. So right. Steve on Speed on Twitter, you will definitely find me there. Then steveadcock.us. I have an ebook called Big Money that's linked on my website as well if you want to read more about our story and exactly how we put all of these pieces into place, from going from a relatively high salary to financial independence in a, just about 4 or 5 years.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, yes, everybody check all of those things out. They should be in the links below or in the show description. And with that, let's jump into our Founder Framework lightning round. So again, 1 to 3 to 4 word answers. The first question is, who is your role model?
The Rock.
The Rock.
I like that one. I really like that one. I love The Rock. What's your last meal on earth?
Medium rare ribeye.
Yes, sir.
Nice. Hustle culture, yay or nay?
Yay.
What's the number one skill set that has helped you get to where you are today?
Being skeptical.
Mm-hmm. If you weren't working on what you're working on right now, what would you be building?
My future.
Yeah, as I was asking that one, I'm like, he kind of can do whatever he wants. So,
Yeah.
So lastly, what is the number one lesson that you have learned?
Keep a positive attitude.
Amazing. Well, I think that's the perfect spot to wrap it up. Thank you for putting so much thought into those questions as well. And it's been so much fun talking to you and learning from you and have you on the podcast, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you very much. I have enjoyed it. Appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. Again, everyone check him out at steveadcock.us and Steve on Speed at Twitter. So, that wraps up the podcast, and thanks for watching.